final project for Tule Lake Box 19. And what we decided to do was we had the majority of our box, over one third, was cases labeled other. So we were like, we really wanted to focus in on those cases and figure out like what was happening in this gray other space, for that made up most of our box. So our goal with that was to create a more specific classification system for these cases that were labeled other, so we could really like kind of pick apart like what was going on and maybe come up with an idea of like why these cases were labeled other, and like what might have been going on with the creation of these records and how that reflects the people at the camp. So our as we said, as I have said, over one third of our cases were other. This amounted to 50. And this is an extremely unuseful classification system, especially when the classification that the subclassification was some like also so different from each other. And if you were looking through the collection trying to find specific things, this would not be useful, and it would be extremely difficult to find things. So you can see here that like here just like how many of these are other, and sometimes it's an open door, sometimes it's a request, sometimes it's other miscellaneous, which, you know, that's super specific.
Yeah, so the plan here was to pull out obviously all the cases that were classified as other, and then create a new classification key. So basically, new categories that we could sort these cases into, which I'm going to show you in a second. And then basically apply this new key to the data and create new graphs and just see if we could clean up the whole section a bit. So you can go to the next. So basically the key we came up with was assault, general misconduct, administrative matters, and nonviolent incidents. Obviously, this isn't like a perfect match for a lot of things, but I think it encapsulates pretty much everything that we were trying to cover. So obviously the data you can see over here is definitely more specific. I tried to tie administrative matters to things like documents, outside requests, police orders, because we had a bunch of those. Assault obviously is self-explanatory, but for some reason there were some reports that were labeled under other. I don't know why, but I added that. For nonviolent incidents, I did those like if there were like fires or like doors left open or like lost keys, that kind of thing. Like I put that under nonviolent. And then for like general misconduct, that was like if people were engaging in like intimidation. We had a lot of like malicious mischief cases, which again is not very specific, especially when a lot of these cases didn't have like a ton of detail. So I think these categories filled in the gaps quite well, and this is an example of that.
Yeah, so with that, here is an example of our classification before we did all of our cleanup. So here the case itself was obviously labeled other, and then this was the more specific classification that it was given. And you can see here that there is a lot of data here, and it is not the easiest to like kind of sort through. Just the way the data and the math breaks down, anything that's labeled 1.9% means that there's a single item with that label. So again, not super useful. And now here is our beautiful we done graph. So all of this data still exists in the classification, and now this data in place of other cases, we have our four new categories. And we can see how a significant chunk of these are general misconduct and administrative matters. And it's really interesting, again, to see like that administrative matters got their own reports, and how much of a significant chunk of these reports had nothing to do with the people actually living in the camp and were just about, well, administrative things that like were still got reports, but like are not the same type of reports as the rest of the box. Again, general misconduct, as we've said, just a more specific term, but I still think, in future, if we had more time, more resources, et cetera, really trying to figure out like what misconduct meant in this context and what malicious mischief meant in this context. It's like what other groups have been saying as well, how there was a criminalization of just like normal everyday things, and a lot of that falls in here. Assault is another interesting one, because if we pulled up our big spreadsheet, we would see that there are assaults that are in categories besides other. So if we took this graph and matched it with the rest of our data, it would be interesting to see how these numbers change. And again, nonviolent incidents. Again, there were other nonviolent incidences as well, but those all had more specific terms to begin with, so they did not make it in this particular data set.
Yeah, so for our conclusions, basically, I think that this is a much more streamlined classification system and is definitely something that we could apply to the whole box, and definitely, just a good jumping off point for cleaning the entire data set and just generally making everything easier to find by case. And hopefully that'll help researchers in their search, because at least in our data set, like the types of cases are all over the place. So I think just creating a more detailed classification system would just be really helpful. And hopefully, maybe with resources and time, like you said, that's something that we could apply to the whole box. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.